Tell me, what would you do if your sister called to say she was staring at your husband on a plane to Paris while your husband was also sitting 5 feet away from you in your kitchen? That was the impossible moment I lived through one ordinary Tuesday morning. The kettle had just clicked off when Mara, my sister, the kind of airline captain who never sounds rattled, phoned me from her cockpit. Her first words were quiet, careful. I need to ask you something strange. Is Julian home? I glanced through the doorway. There he was, Julian, perfectly at ease in his chair, newspaper folded like he'd rehearsed it, coffee steam curling upward. Yes, I said, every syllable weighted. He's here. But the silence that followed stretched too long. Then, Mara whispered words that split reality in half. That can't be true. I'm looking at him right now. He just boarded my flight with another woman. Behind me, I heard our apartment door open. Footsteps. Julian entered, holding the coffee mug I'd bought for his 40th, white ceramic stamped world's most decent husband. He smiled like it was just another morning. But was it? How could he be here and there at the exact same time? And who was the woman by his side in Paris? I gripped the phone tighter. Mara's breathing rasped through the speaker, waiting for me to respond, waiting for me to solve the unsolvable. I told her I'd call her back, but her voice carried the same urgency it had the day Dad died, like she knew my life was about to crack open again. Julian studied me, brow furrowed. Everything all right? You look pale. Did I? I caught my reflection in the microwave door. The same hair, the same eyes, the same face I'd carried for 37 years. But something had shifted. Because once you hear your husband is in two places at once, nothing ever looks the same again. What if the person standing in your kitchen, your husband, looked exactly right in every detail, except your sister just sent you proof that he was 30,000 feet away, flying to Paris with another woman? The kitchen suddenly felt foreign, as if the walls themselves were tilting. Like that moment, you realize a picture frame has been hanging crooked for months, and you can't believe you never saw it before. I forced my hand steady around a coffee mug. 2 decades as a forensic accountant had trained me to mask panic, to keep composure even while unraveling million-dollar lies. Go back to bed, Julian suggested, his British accent wrapping around the words like a familiar blanket. Once, that accent had charmed me. At a dinner party 8 years earlier, when he'd spilled wine on my dress while gesturing wildly about rugby versus football. I'd thought the flustered apology was endearing. But now, I wasn't sure if it had always been calculated. I studied him. The angular jaw, green eyes flecked with gold, the scar above his brow from a childhood bike crash. Every detail was exactly as it should be, too exact. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Mara. Look at this now. The photo filled my screen. A shot from an airplane window, business class row 3. A man in a Tom Ford suit leaned toward a blonde who rested her hand on his forearm. The angle was off, but the profile? Unmistakable. The way he tilted his head when he spoke, the exact curve of his jaw. It was Julian, my Julian. I looked up from the photo to the Julian in my kitchen, gray cashmere sweater, reading glasses pushed into his hair, our wedding band glinting on his hand. How could both exist? Which version was the lie? Actually, I said evenly, surprising myself with the calm in my voice, I think I'll make pancakes. He raised an eyebrow. On a Tuesday? What's the occasion? The occasion was that my sister was staring at my husband on a plane while my husband was also buttering toast across from me. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. Can't a wife make pancakes without needing a reason? I asked. He smiled, that same half smile that once made my heart skip, but now only twisted my stomach. Of course. Though you know I've got squash at 11. So I pulled out flour, eggs, and milk. Simple, reliable things. Things that made sense, unlike the impossible photo on my phone. As I measured, another thought cut through. All the small inconsistencies I'd waved away. The dinner when he came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, the Boston conference I could never verify, and his perfection lately, too perfect. No forgotten anniversaries, no careless socks on the floor, just flawless. I love you, Julian said suddenly, leaning down to kiss my forehead. His lips were warm, familiar. I love you too, I heard myself reply, but the words were hollow, tin against the measuring cup in my hand. He returned to his paper, flipping pages with practiced precision, but I was learning something vital. Precision can be faked, routines can be rehearsed, and reality can be edited. My thumbs trembled over my phone as I typed to Mara, "Don't let that plane take off." But deep down, I already knew. The engines were running, the doors had closed, and whatever game was being played in my life, it had already begun. He left for squash like he always did, gym bag over his shoulder, confident stride, and the apartment door clicked shut behind him. That sound should have been ordinary. Instead, it felt like the last normal thing that would happen that day. I watched Julian disappear around the corner, same left turn toward the athletic club he'd made every Tuesday and Saturday for years. Predictable, comfortable. Except comfort had been traded for suspicion. The moment he was out of sight, I moved with purpose to his home office, the mahogany desk from that Hamptons estate sale, diplomas from Cambridge and Harvard on the wall, every surface curated with the neatness of a life you assume is truthful. Organization can be a mask. My years as a forensic accountant taught me that tidy systems often hide the mess underneath. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint accounts, fingers tapping like a surgeon's. The statements loaded month by month, each line a quiet accusation. There it was, a charge at the Mandarin Oriental in Tokyo, March 15th to 18th. I remembered that weekend. Julian said he'd driven to Connecticut to help his mother after his father's funeral. He'd insisted I stay home after a brutal audit. The bill showed 2 guests, 2 spa treatments, room service for 2. I scrolled faster. Goodbye, the 4 seasons. Another client dinner that required an overnight stay. Purchases at Cartier with no gifts left at home. My trained brain began to catalog patterns. Small withdrawals. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. Carefully kept below reporting thresholds. The kind of siphoning I'd traced in corporate fraud cases, except this time the victim was my own household. Maybe they were client expenses. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. But my phone buzzed before I could settle on denial. Nora, my college roommate turned private investigator, texted, "I'm 15 minutes away. Brace yourself. It's big." Nora and I had started at NYU in accounting. While I went forensic, she'd carved out a shadowy niche in marital reconnaissance after her own divorce exposed ugly truths. While I waited, I dug deeper. More hotels, more dinners. Then Nora was at my door in all black, tablet in hand and that same grim look she wore when she once told me about Richard's affair. "Show me," she said, and her fingers flew through files with practiced speed. A photo popped up. A blonde, Lila Voss, 26, pharmaceutical rep, arm casually draped over Julian's in a business class cabin. Tagged photos, Miami hotel bars, gala shots, the timeline stitched together. At least 3 months. "How long?" I asked, my voice thin. "At least 3 months," Nora said. But that's not the worst part. She pulled another file. Security footage from our lobby last Tuesday. Julian walked in at 6:47 p.m., briefcase in hand, timestamp matches. Everything normal until she zoomed. "Watch his shadow," Nora said. The shadow fell wrong, flickering as he passed under the chandelier. Invisible to most eyes, glaring to one, looking for fakery. "This is deep fake," Nora said bluntly. "Someone's been inserting fabricated footage into your building's system. This isn't a prank. It's expensive, professional. Why go to such lengths? Who would pay for this kind of deception?" I had more questions than answers, and then Nora produced another small file. She'd asked neighbors discreetly. Mrs. Hargreaves from 20C, 78, Two Persian cats, self-appointed lobby sentry, had seen Julian leave with suitcases the weekend I thought he was in Connecticut. 3 months ago, Mrs. Hargreaves swore she saw Julian leaving with suitcases the very weekend I was in Boston. What if a neighbor's grocery run became the first breadcrumb in A? The memory landed like cold water. I could still see that conference, 2 days of numbing panels on SEC rules, then the slow, familiar relief of coming home Sunday night to find Julian at the stove, rosemary chicken steaming on the counter. He told me he'd spent the weekend organizing the home office and catching up on sleep. The office looked untouched. He looked like himself. But was he? Mrs. Hargreaves remembered the day because Julian had helped her with her bags. She'd noticed his suitcases and said he was going away for a while. The detail stuck in my throat. My accountant's brain tried to make neat columns out of chaos. Did someone impersonate him? Is that possible? People don't just get replaced, I mouthed, and Nora, who'd become my private intel since our NYU days, answered with a quiet, unnerving truth. They don't. Not without resources and planning. I ran through his work in my head, mergers, acquisitions, the usual banking grind. Nothing screamed target for high-tech identity theft, unless Julian had hidden something from me. I needed footage, receipts, phone logs, every entry and exit for the last 3 months. Nora tapped away, already pulling threads. I'll get what I can, she said, handing me an encrypted phone and a warning. Act normal until we know the scope. This is not a simple affair. The warning turned the afternoon into motion without meaning. I cleaned things I hadn't needed to clean, organized folders that were already neat, anything to quiet the stomach that refused to settle. Then, at 5:30, the key turned in the lock. He came in with the same practiced stride, the man who might not be Julian at all. I smoothed my face into calm and moved into the kitchen. Something smells amazing, he called, his voice the same as always, muscle memory wrapped in a familiar cadence. I chose shrimp scampi because it was dangerous. My grandmother's recipe, garlic and white wine and linguine, Julian's favorite. The real Julian had a documented life-threatening shellfish allergy. The medical bracelet proved it. I set the plate in front of him, my voice steady because 20 years in fraud investigations teaches you how to wear composure, like armor. He looked delighted, picked up his fork, and ate. No swelling, no scramble for an EpiPen, just appreciation. This is incredible, he said. Your grandmother would be proud. I watched him like a scientist, cataloging micro-expressions, gestures, the gaps between practiced motion and truth. Then I pushed the next test. We should visit your mother this weekend. The Julian I knew would invent an excuse. His relationship with his mother had never been easy. This man smiled and agreed immediately. She'll be thrilled. The phone behind the fruit bowl whispered, recording every word for the day it might become evidence. And if he's a better version of Julian, what exactly was he covering up and for hook? What if the man asleep beside you is rehearsing someone else's life and you find the script? After dinner, we did what married people do. Netflix, small talk, the silence that feels like shared history. But the silence had teeth now. Every word Julian spoke, every familiar touch, felt like a performance watched from behind glass. At 10, I stretched and lied. I'm exhausted. He kissed my forehead, warm, familiar, but the pressure was off in a way I couldn't name. In the bedroom, he ran through his bedtime routine with anthropological exactness. 2 minutes with the electric toothbrush, a careful mouthwash gargle, the same face-washing cadence. The real Julian was a chronic insomniac. He read into the small hours. This man fell asleep like someone who had nothing to hide. I stayed still, counting his even breaths until I was sure he'd sunk deep. Then I moved with the slow precision of someone disarming a bomb. His briefcase sat where it always did, leather softened by years. At first glance, his things were ordinary: laptop, business cards, folders. But beneath a stack of portfolios, I found an envelope that didn't belong, a pasta made out to Marcus Webb at an address in Queens, an actor's union card, and then pages, handwritten dossiers cataloging my life in exhausting detail. My morning routine, the exact coffee cup I preferred, phrases I used, our anniversary date circled, notes on my father's death, sensitive subject. It read like audition prep. Eliza likes one sugar, no cream. Call sister Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tears at Casablanca finale. At the bottom, 3 months maximum. Maintain cover until transfer complete. 3 months, an expiration stamped on intimacy. I slipped the papers back into Marcus's briefcase with shaking fingers, photographed each page on the encrypted phone Nora had given me, and crawled into bed beside a stranger wearing my husband's face. Sunday morning revealed the choreography in full. Marcus moved through our apartment with studied ease, every smile, every gesture and act. When he said he wanted to go to the gym, I created a crisis at the office and watched him leave, distracted and practiced. I locked myself in my corner office above Park Avenue and opened the forensic software I'd used to hunt embezzlers for Fortune 500s. If anyone could follow this money, it would be me. What I found was surgical. Transfers of $9,999, just under federal reporting thresholds, routing to accounts I didn't recognize. The trail snaked through shell companies in the Caymans, Panama, Cyprus, each hop a jurisdiction designed to vanish paper trails. Every transfer had been authorized with Julian's credentials at times when Marcus had been sitting across from me, eating my grandmother's pasta or sleeping in our bed. The real Julian was somewhere else, while an imposter performed domestic bliss and the accounts bled dry. 15 years of savings. Every dollar we'd worked for, gone. Stolen while I slept beside a man rehearsing my husband's life like a role in a play. And the money? That was only the beginning. The numbers stared back at me, cold and undeniable. $400,000 drained from our portfolio, $600,000 pulled from a home equity line we'd never touched, another $300,000 bled from retirement accounts in loans designed not to trigger alerts, $1.3 million gone, methodically extracted under my nose, while Marcus stirred my coffee with the exact number of sugars Julian always used. But then came worse. Access logs from my professional database revealed something far more dangerous. Unfamiliar IP addresses pulling confidential audit files. Corporate data that, in the wrong hands, could fuel insider trading worth tens of millions. And every trail led back to me. My credentials, my reputation, my license, my career, everything at risk of imploding. Madison Vale, the blonde from the flight, wasn't a pharmaceutical rep at all. Her LinkedIn revealed ties to hedge fund managers notorious for exploiting gray markets. Her travel photos aligned perfectly with suspicious trades timed to FDA announcements. This wasn't just adultery or fraud, it was federal crime, and my name was the one written all over it. I needed someone who understood the system. I called Grace Morrison, a former prosecutor turned private attorney whose own divorce from a corrupt judge had made her an expert in the gray spaces where the law abandoned women. She arrived in 20 minutes, hair pulled into a hasty knot, instincts still sharp enough to rattle any defense attorney. I laid everything out. The transfers, the stolen data, the damning briefcase notes. Grace studied it all with the same intensity that had once shredded defendants on the stand. Her verdict was ice. This is sophisticated. Identity theft, fraud, espionage. But here's the problem. Every click is authorized. His passwords, his biometrics. Without Julian here to contradict it, you're looking at his word against yours. She paused. And Marcus? He can claim he was hired, legitimately. Until Julian resurfaces, the authorities won't move fast enough. By then, the money will be gone. Before I could respond, the encrypted phone buzzed. A single text, check Julian's old phone. Grace leaned closer. Breadcrumbs, she muttered. Somebody wants you to find this. We raced back to the apartment. Marcus was still at the gym, routine as ever. I dug out Julian's cracked iPhone from the desk drawer he always said he'd recycle. It powered on at 5%. Alive. Messages filled the screen. 8 months of planning with Madison, photos, proof. My blood froze at one line. The wife suspects nothing. Marcus is perfect. By the time she figures it out, we'll be untouchable. The most recent message was worse. Tomorrow, we finalize everything. Our usual place in Paris, then disappear forever. Grace's eyes locked with mine. Tomorrow is Monday. They're closing this tonight. The fear that had gripped me hardened into something else. Resolve. The same precision I once used to unravel multi-million-dollar frauds would now protect my own life. My fingers flew across my laptop as I built a financial virus disguised as ordinary tax files. Elegant, invisible, designed to activate the second Julian or Madison accessed our accounts abroad. When triggered, it would freeze everything, alert federal investigators, and trap them in their own theft. Grace watched me code. Is that even legal? It's my account, I said. I'm protecting my assets. Completely legal. I named the files Q3 Investment Review and Tax Documents 2025. Julian's arrogance would bait him. He'd never make a major move without checking our investments. Crime hadn't erased old habits. The apartment door opened. Marcus returned from the gym, sweat staged like every other detail of his life. Grace slipped Julian's phone into her purse while I snapped my laptop closed. Working on Sunday? He asked lightly, charm rehearsed to perfection. Just finishing up, I said smoothly. Grace stopped by. We're collaborating on a case. He nodded. Easy. Good to see you. Stay for lunch? Actually, I said, standing, eyes locked on him, I was thinking we could have lunch in Atoria. You know, where we went after our honeymoon. The place with the grilled octopus. Marcus's smile didn't break, but his eyes flickered with panic. Atoria didn't exist. The real Julian and I had honeymooned in Santorini. Grace caught the lie in real time, her gaze bouncing between us like a tennis match. Marcus stalled, then improvised. The little taverna where we danced until dawn, you said it was the most romantic night of your life. Fabrication. I smiled warmly, as though nothing had cracked. You're probably right. Let's just order Thai instead. His shoulders sagged with visible relief. Another test failed, another seam in the performance. Grace excused herself, taking the evidence with her. Marcus headed to shower, and I was left standing in the kitchen, one step closer to unraveling the lie, but still in the same apartment with the stranger playing my husband. What if 3 phone calls could torch a carefully built lie? And what if the final ring pulled another secret into the light? I made the calls that would set the dominoes tipping. First, Robert Steinberg, Julian's largest client. I kept my voice casual, worried, but not alarmed. Robert, sorry to bother you on a Sunday, but I noticed something odd in your portfolio while reviewing adjacent accounts. Probably clerical, but you might want to flag it. That tiny seed of doubt was all it took to trigger the internal wheels that would unspool Julian's access. Next, Jennifer Wu at Phoenix Capital. Same script, different angle. A mysterious transfer not matching your patterns. Strange, but worth a look. Then David Martinez at Meridian Financial. By morning, 3 major firms would be chasing anomalies that, if traced, would point back to Julian's credentials. I hung up the third call and the phone in my hand buzzed again. This time, it was the assisted living facility in New Jersey. My chest tightened. Sunday calls at that hour usually meant emergency. Ellen, the facility director, told me my mother was agitated, insisting someone was lying about my husband visiting her. I drove 90 quiet minutes through trees turning gold. Marcus still thinking I was dealing with a medication issue. My mother's room smelled like lemon cleaner and old photos. Her windows looked onto the garden where she'd spent decades watching seasons change. Ava, she grabbed my hands with surprising strength for 82. That woman is lying. You said Julian was here last month? He wasn't. Ellen stood awkwardly in the corner. The visitor log had no entry. My mother, despite the fog of dementia, had sharp moments. She remembered the day, pudding day, and that Julian had asked about my father's life insurance, about a policy I'd only discovered after his death. A policy with $500,000 that had paid for my mother's care. Few people knew. My stomach went ice cold as she mentioned the safety deposit box and the coin collection my father once treasured. Ellen pulled up the facility's archived footage. We scrolled through weeks, families visiting, staff changes, routine comings and goings, until August 15th at 2:47 p.m. There he was, Julian, briefcase in hand, spending 43 minutes with my mother. But when Ellen showed me the photographed sign-in sheet, there was a blank where his name should have been. Someone had surgically removed the signature from the archived image. They'd faked the log, but missed the video. They'd planned this for months, targeting the thin places where my mother's memory lived, mining details no one else would think to protect. I drove back with the security footage saved on my phone, each mile folding the cruelty of it inward. Traffic moved slow enough for my mind to catalog the calculated extraction, visiting an elderly woman's trust and turning her confusion into a ledger item. Then Mara texted. Her flight had landed 3 hours earlier at Charles de Gaulle. The photos tightened my grip on the wheel. Julian and Lila Voss at the currency exchange, his hand at the small of her back. A taxi shot with the two of them laughing at something on his phone. Timestamp 4:47 p.m., Paris. And then the hotel photo. The Hotel Lancaster on the Champs-Élysées, rooms from €800 a night. Lila wore the diamond bracelet I'd thought Julian bought for his mother's 70th birthday. The intimacy between them wasn't a spark, it was a practiced ease. This wasn't a fling. It might have begun long before I ever suspected. I pulled into the garage at 8:30 and saw Marcus pacing by the elevator, phone to his ear. He straightened when he saw me. Concern rehearsed too late. "There you are," he said, ending his call. "How's your mother?" "She's all right, just confused about some old financial papers," I replied, watching that small flash of relief cross his face when I didn't elaborate. What if you invited the people who could convict your husband to your living room on purpose and watched the man wearing his face crumble under the weight of the truth? Back in the apartment, I made a decision that could either blow the whole scheme wide open or sabotage my chance at clean justice. Calm can be a weapon. So I sat across from Marcus at the dining table, phone in hand, and placed the bait with the casualness of someone ordering coffee. "I've been thinking," I said, scrolling my calendar. "Our anniversary's next month. 8 years since that dinner party where we met." Marcus nodded, actor's training locking his expression into neutral, even though Julian and I had been married 7 years, not 8. Another little crack in his performance. "I want to do something special," I continued, letting enthusiasm lace my voice. "A surprise Tuesday morning, before markets open. Invite your colleagues, your biggest clients. Show them the apartment. Champagne, the pastries from that French place." He blinked at the odd timing. Tuesday morning is not a typical party hour, but he couldn't refuse without breaking character. "If that's what you want," he said finally. "Perfect. Send them now." While I make dinner, I watched him compose the message, fingers hesitant on his phone. Those recipients, investment bankers, major clients, were witnesses who couldn't easily be explained away when federal agents arrived. Within minutes, replies pinged back, confusion folded into compliance. The invitations worked. While I plated salmon and asparagus, simple, unremarkable, so no one would notice my mind racing, I felt a strange sympathy for Marcus. He was a failed actor from Queens, desperate enough to take a role that paid more than any audition ever had. He thought he was in on something clever, perhaps a prank or a temporary job. Instead, he'd become an accessory to crimes with prison stakes. He sat at the island, keeping up the illusion. I offered wine. He refused, first time in months, saying he felt unwell. The instinctual fear in his eyes was real now. I poured myself a glass and steeled myself. "Marcus," I said quietly, and watched his body snap taut. I never called Julian by the wrong name. "I know who you are." Silence stretched, brittle. His face slid from practiced calm to raw panic. The British accent fell away, replaced by a flat Brooklyn. "How long have you known?" he whispered. Since Tuesday morning, I said, when my sister saw the real Julian boarding a flight while you sat in our living room. He bowed his head, human at last. I didn't know about the crimes, he pleaded. He said he was separated. He told me to keep up appearances for business reasons. He paid me $20,000 in cash to pretend for 3 months. His voice broke. I've been auditioning for 15 years. I needed the money. His confession was small and awful, one more victim entangled in Julian's plan. My phone buzzed. Grace. FBI moving tomorrow morning. Everything's in place. The text landed like a gavel. Marcus, this stranger who'd slept in my bed and eaten my food, looked at me with defeat and something like gratitude. Tomorrow, the federal agents would arrive. The people I'd invited would be there to witness the unmasking. Marcus had a choice: be arrested as a co-conspirator or cooperate and be a witness. Witness, he blurted immediately, then added, I have documents, recordings. He made me keep everything as insurance. He led me to a storage unit key and produced contracts, recordings, step-by-step instructions, evidence that turned his performance into a blueprint for crime. We barely slept. In the small hours, my phone rang. Mara, exhaustion and relief in her voice. They got them. Charles de Gaulle, trying to fly to Switzerland, arrested in the lounge. I put her on speaker. Marcus sat up on the couch like a man about to hear his own verdict. The footage Mara described showed Julian trying to flee, tackled in front of stunned travelers. It was already on the news. I made coffee with hands that didn't tremble. The apartment would soon be full of witnesses. By 7:30 a.m., the first guests arrived: Robert Steinberg, Jennifer Wu, David Martinez, clients, partners, curious faces in suits clutching coffee. Marcus stood by the window, frozen. The script he'd learned couldn't teach him how to be arrested. I stepped forward, playing hostess one last time. Thank you for coming, I said, voice steady. You'll understand in a moment why your presence is important. At 7:58 a.m., heavy footsteps approached, multiple pairs moving with purpose. The doorbell rang, then pounding, federal agents with a warrant. Confusion rippled through the room as 6 FBI agents entered, uniforms turning the living room into a crime scene. The lead, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, raised her credentials. Agent Sarah Brennan, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We're looking for Julian Mercer. That's me, Marcus said, the Brooklyn slipping into his tone as relief washed across his face. I want to cooperate. I have evidence. I was hired to impersonate him. Silence snapped like a twig. Someone's coffee cup clattered, and the room realized what had already happened. The executives froze. Robert Steinberg's mouth worked without sound. Jennifer Wu's thumb already scrolled for counsel. Agent Sarah Brennan's voice cut through the stunned air with procedural calm. Mr. Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy, identity theft, and money laundering. As they clipped the cuffs on Marcus, his eyes met mine with something close to gratitude. Storage unit on Queens Boulevard, unit 447. Everything's there, he blurted, as if the reveal might buy him a moment of mercy. While the agents read Marcus his rights, my laptop chimed the signal I'd been waiting for. The financial trap I'd set, those innocuous-looking investment files, had sprung. On the screen, I watched accounts in the Caymans, Switzerland, and Cyprus freeze in real time. $47 million locked in digital amber. Transaction logs forwarded automatically to federal prosecutors, the IRS, and the SEC. Every agency that Julian thought he'd slipped past now had a breadcrumb trail straight to his doorstep. Mrs. Mercer, Agent Brennan said, approaching while her team secured Marcus, we'll need your formal statement. Of course, but first, those in the room deserved to know why they'd been summoned at dawn. I cued the recording of Mara's Tuesday morning call. Her question, the one that started this whole avalanche, played back crisp and small in the suddenly hushed living room. I need to ask you something strange. Your husband, is he home right now? Comprehension spread across faces like daylight. They hadn't come for a party. They were witnesses to the unspooling of a scheme that could have taken their companies down. Agent Brennan addressed the room with the facts. Julian Mercer had been stealing corporate secrets and enabling insider trades using information accessed through his wife's forensic work. The man they'd been meeting for months was not Julian, but Mr. Webb, hired to maintain the illusion while the real Julian fled with stolen assets. David Martinez sank into a chair, already doing damage calculations. Jennifer Wu dialed counsel. Robert Steinberg walked over to me, his expression softening into something like reluctant admiration. "You figured it out," he said. "You set this up." I nodded, suddenly tired and vindicated both. He'd counted on me not seeing, or not proving it. The audit anomalies I'd hinted at days earlier were real, his systems compromised, but now the FBI had the evidence to trace what was taken and how. Agent Brennan's phone buzzed. She listened, then turned to me. French authorities had Julian Mercer and Lila Voss in custody at Charles de Gaulle. They'd been arrested trying to board a flight to Switzerland. Extradition was on the table. My home, our sanctuary, was now a federal crime scene. Agents photographed the rooms, labeled evidence, and treated our life like a case file. The guests filtered out slowly, offering condolences, awkward handshakes, stunned gratitude. Before she left, Agent Brennan handed me a card. "You'll need to testify. Your forensic work and that virus you created are the foundation of this case." I said I would. I meant it. The apartment quieted. Marcus's props, his coffee cup, the blanket on the couch, the notes he'd used to memorize my life, sat like stage pieces after the final bow. I checked my phone. Shaky video from Charles de Gaulle played again. Julian in handcuffs, composure shattered, being led through the terminal as onlookers recorded. Lila beside him, mascara streaked, the Paris dream collapsing into police custody. Time had telescoped. What felt like years of small betrayals had been compressed into hours. The movers had taken the last boxes. Our walls were already raw where pictures had hung. I stood by the window, holding keys heavy with the finality of it, waiting for the building manager to take possession. The divorce moved fast once prosecutors presented the evidence. Julian's attorney in France had little to work with against identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge, one who recognized predatory financial behavior when she saw it, was unsympathetic to a husband who'd bought himself a look-alike while siphoning marital assets. The settlement returned more than I expected. Proceeds from the apartment sale, recovered funds from frozen accounts, and damages paid to avoid a public trial. Money couldn't replace the 3 months I'd slept beside a stranger, or the 7 years of a marriage that turned out to be performance. But it did buy something I hadn't had in a long time: freedom to rebuild. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder for a client meeting. The irony wasn't lost on me. Trauma had become my specialty. I signed the lease on a small office in the Flatiron District, Chin Forensic Consulting, focused on marital asset protection and identity verification. Word spread by referral. Just last week, I helped a surgeon uncover that her husband had been using deepfake tech to appear at conferences while running a second practice in Miami. The week before, I exposed a producer whose spouse employed multiple lookalikes to maintain alibis across cities. Each case felt like peeling back layers with the same tools that saved my life. The building manager arrived to take the keys with professional detachment. As I rode the elevator one last time, my phone buzzed. Mara texted, "Giovanni's at 7. I smiled, maybe for the first genuine reason in months, because life, improbably, was starting to feel mine again. What happens after the storm passes, when justice has been served, the lies dismantled, and all that's left is the quiet question: what now? Giovanni's hadn't changed in 40 years. The red sauce was still the same one our grandmother swore was the only acceptable Italian food this side of Naples. The vinyl booths still patched with duct tape, the checkered tablecloths stained with generations of spilled Chianti. Even the owner's son still butchered bruschetta, despite being third-generation Italian-American. Kara was already at our usual corner booth, a bottle of Chianti uncorked. She stood and hugged me tighter and longer than she had in years. We weren't just sisters anymore. We were survivors bound by a secret war no one else could fully understand. "You did it," Kara said, pouring wine into glasses that looked like they'd been through both world wars. "The apartment's really gone?" "Handed over the keys 20 minutes ago," I admitted, the cheap wine tasting like childhood dinners. 7 years gone in a single afternoon. Not erased, transformed. Kara raised her glass. "To the woman who figured out her husband was living 2 lives at once and brought down an international fraud ring," I countered with a smile. "To the pilot who made the phone call that saved mine." We drank, ritual more than celebration, but I saw the guilt flicker in her eyes. For months, Kara had carried the weight of that call, convinced she'd ruined my marriage. I'd told her again and again she hadn't destroyed it. She'd simply revealed what was already crumbling. Survivor's guilt rarely listens to logic. "I have something for you," Kara said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Dayton, Ohio return address." The handwriting, Marcus Webb's, careful and precise. I hesitated before opening it. The man who'd lived my life for 3 months. What could he possibly say? "Dear Evelyn," it began. He thanked me for not pressing more charges. The FBI already had enough to bury him, but my choice gave him probation and community service instead of years behind bars. Now he was teaching acting at a community college, using his skills, finally, for something honest. He told his students about those 3 months, how the best performance of his life was also the worst mistake he'd ever made. He warned them, some roles aren't worth playing, no matter the pay. He wrote about me, too, how he wondered if I'd ever recover from what Julian had done. But then he'd read about my new firm, about the women I was helping, and realized I'd turned poison into medicine. That strength, he said, was something he didn't know existed. And then, one last piece, a photo from my wedding tucked into the letter, me and Julian laughing at something off camera, joy so unguarded it hurt to look at. Marcus confessed he hadn't turned it over to the FBI. It had been part of Julian's instruction packet. He hoped I'd find something real again to replace what had been stolen. I studied that younger version of myself, trying to remember what had been so funny. The memory wouldn't come. "He seems genuinely sorry," Kara said softly, reading over my shoulder. "Maybe he was a victim too," I admitted. Julian had destroyed more than one life, chasing money now locked in frozen accounts. Marcus's mistake was simply being desperate enough to take the role. We ordered comfort food, pasta arrabbiata for me, linguine vongole for Cara, and enough garlic bread to make any cardiologist shudder. The familiar flavors grounded me, reminding me that life still had texture, warmth, and continuity. "What's next?" Kara asked, twirling pasta. "Rebecca Harrison tomorrow," I replied automatically. "She runs a tech startup, thinks her husband might be faking business trips with AI. Then Thursday's the Whitman case." "I meant for you," Kara interrupted gently. "Not work. You." The question lingered like another guest at the table. 6 months ago, I thought my future was scripted in quiet predictability. Now, at 37, I was single, successful in a field I'd carved out of disaster, and completely uncertain about everything except my next client. "I don't know," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. And that's oddly liberating. If this story of betrayal and calculated revenge kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part, when Evelyn served Julian's supposed favorite shrimp scampi, knowing the real man was deathly allergic, and watched the imposter eat it without so much as a cough. What was your jaw-dropping moment? Drop it in the comments below. I'll be reading. And don't miss more gripping stories of betrayal, justice, and survival. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us for the next unraveling. As I sat across from Kara in that old Italian diner, it struck me. The life I thought was stable had been nothing more than a staged performance. My marriage wasn't destroyed in one phone call from my sister, it had been eroded long before, layer by layer, deception by deception. But out of that collapse came something I hadn't expected: clarity. Julian's betrayal left scars, yes. It stole years, trust, and illusions, but it also forced me to build something stronger, a business dedicated to uncovering hidden truths, and a version of myself that wasn't afraid to face uncertainty. Marcus's letter reminded me that even villains can be pawns, and that sometimes survival means turning the very tools used against you into weapons of your own. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but for the first time, the not knowing feels less like danger and more like freedom.